Wish TV. All Indiana Politics
is your premier source for Indiana politics.
Focusing on issues that matter to you.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage, exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders, expert analysis on critical legislation. From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Your day moves fast. Your news should too. That's why there's a new and improved Wish TV app, bringing you more local news, breaking alerts, live streaming, weather forecasts, radar, and Indiana sports, all in one place. Customize your news feed to see the stories that matter most to you and get the information you need when you need it. Download the new and improved Wish TV app today on iOS or Android and take News 8 with you everywhere. Now, from your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
A major leadership shakeup in the state Senate. Hello, everyone, and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist, in for Phil Sanchez. Senate President pro tempore Rod Bray says he will not seek re-election to his leadership post. Rod Bray has been Senate President pro tempore since 2018. He opposed last year's unsuccessful attempt to redraw Indiana's congressional maps. His decision comes nearly 3 months after anti-redistricting Senate Republicans lost heavily in the primaries. Bray says he will continue to serve in the Senate. His term runs through 2028. Bray says our caucus has led the way in numerous policy areas, passing laws that resulted in more than 20 tax cuts, initiatives to lower the cost of health care, laws that resulted in a sharp increase in literacy rates in our schools, and measures that ushered in record capital investment through 2024. That's a track record I will always stand behind, and I'm incredibly proud to have accomplished this work as the pro tem alongside my distinguished colleagues. The U.S. House has approved a defense bill that includes much of Senator Todd Young's Ships for America Act. It's intended to incentivize and promote domestic shipbuilding. Young tells me the bill might mean opportunities for industry here in Indiana. We also discussed his support for the Stop Insider Trading Act and the latest in the war with Iran. And joining us now from Washington is Senator Todd Young. Senator, welcome back to the show.
Always good to be with you, Garrett.
The House approved a version of the National Defense Authorization Act that includes most of your Ships for America Act. At this point, how do you rate the chances that some form of the Ships for America Act becomes law?
Well, I think the chances are very good. This is, as you know, Garrett, a broadly bipartisan effort. We're actively working with the White House, and they've been highly supportive. We have, as you indicated, been able to get this legislation, 2/3 of it, incorporated into the National Defense Bill, and there's a resolve in the White House to see that we get all of it in before year's end. So we still have a couple of colleagues on the Senate side to persuade. I, of course, will be working on that, but I never take anything for granted around here, and I think it's just so important for the country. This is clearly a national security deficiency we have during a time of war, and we don't need to be relying on Chinese ships to run our economy. So this is something I think most Hoosiers understand is important for our country and can create real good jobs across the industrial Midwest if we can get this legislation passed.
If the NDAA passes Congress in its current form, what's in it for Indiana, particularly with regard to those SHIPS Act provisions?
Well, we aim to build 250 merchant vessels over the next 10 years. You could imagine, best case scenarios, some of those vessels are actually fabricated in the state of Indiana. I understand that our state has already heard from some of the world's leading shipbuilders about potentially investing up next to the integrated steel mills we have in the region up there near Chicago. So that would be a great play. Short of that, you can imagine us producing a lot more steel. Is the leading steel producer in the nation. Numerous component makers that currently serve the auto industry could instead pivot and also provide to the maritime industry. And then there are engines and other very sophisticated manufactured products that go on top of or are part of those vessels, and all those demands would increase. So my job here at the federal level is to create the demand signal so that the private sector responds to this national security need, and those states and regions that prioritize competing for the business can do so.
The House also recently passed the Stop Insider Trading Act. You're pushing for that in the Senate. Why do you believe that bill is needed?
Well, listen, in short, members of Congress, senators and House members alike are sent here to serve the American people, not to manage their stock portfolios. There is a lack of trust in our institutions almost across the board in this country, but there aren't many institutions where trust is lower than Congress. So let's get our House in order. Let's take this easy step of ensuring that those members of Congress, all of us who are exposed to sensitive, non-public and market-moving information on a daily basis, aren't acting on that information in unfair or unjust ways. Our legislation would take the easiest approach, which is just prohibiting individual stock trading by members of Congress completely. As a modest sacrifice in order to serve the American people in this frankly privilege of working here in Congress.
My understanding is that the current version of the act would not stop members from selling stock they already own. Does that blunt the bill's effects?
I think we would be hard-pressed in Congress to get a bill that can go through the process that goes as far as I would like. And make no mistake, even if we get this bill through, I will be declaring victory, but also continuing to advocate efforts to close up any potential loopholes or shortcomings. But with that said, there is a provision in this bill that before any individual stocks are sold, notice has to be given so that members, wouldn't be timing their sales around particular events that only they are aware of or very few others are aware of. So I think we do address the matter, but could we go further? Around here, you can almost always go further, and I'll continue to be a strong advocate, perhaps the leading advocate in Congress for getting these bills done.
Turning to the conflict with Iran, we just wrapped up another 13-day bombing campaign. Does the Trump administration need congressional authorization to do anything further?
Well, I've been pretty clear about this. I think that before you send United States Marines into a combat zone or start sending bombers over a country, it's best, in fact, legal precedent dictates, it's important to come to Congress, to have debates, to stress test your plans to make sure they're prudent and well thought through, and as importantly, to earn the support of the American people, hopefully in a bipartisan way, so that the country is unified when it goes to war. I've been clear that I don't feel like that happened in this case. But I think what the Democrats are proposing right now, immediately pulling back, would create all sorts of dangers. We are in this fight. We have to stay unified and engaged in this fight in some fashion. Let's come up with a smart strategy so that the price at the pump and throughout our economy will be lower, and so that we can actually prevent the leading state sponsor of international terror from ever developing a weapon of mass destruction. I think maybe the best way to do that, Garrett, right now, because I fear with the resumption of bombing intermittently, we've lost some negotiating leverage and maybe even credibility. So maybe the best way to do it is continue with a blockade on Iran, announce to the American people and to the world that we're going to be playing a long game and constricting the boa constrictor around the Iranian economy over a period of time.
Based on your briefings, what's the current status of Iran's nuclear program, including its stockpile of nuclear material?
Well, the current status is there's a bunch of what the president calls nuclear dust, some nuclear materials that are buried beneath a mountain. And their advanced centrifuges are also buried. We have the ability, through our exquisite instruments and very capable military, to monitor that mountain and make sure that there's no effort to extract those things and to reconstitute this capacity. I would make very clear that as we indicate, we don't intend to keep bombing unless we are bombed. I'd make very clear that we'll continue to monitor that situation, and if efforts are made to extract these from the mountain, we will go back in and do what we have to do. So I think we're in a stable situation. This is not a long-term solution. But a long game, I think, is the best way to get to a longer-term negotiated settlement, which is how this thing must end.
Coming up, more than $100 million in rural health care grants are coming to Indiana. I'll explain where they might be going. Welcome back. Telehealth and mobile care are just some of the ideas that might soon receive millions in rural health care grants. People in some parts of the state face a 45-minute drive to the nearest emergency room and more than an hour to the nearest maternity ward. State health officials tell me they've begun reviewing finalists for Grow Rural Health. I caught up with the director right before she went to her weekly ER shift.
I've definitely seen patients who have come in sicker than they needed to be because they had difficulty accessing providers to be able to, one, just diagnose their hypertension or diabetes and then be able to keep it under control.
Brown administration officials announced on Tuesday they're now deciding how they'll distribute $120 million worth of grants. Dozens of community groups representing 8 rural regions around Indiana sent in their proposals on July 1st. Ideas include mobile integrated health, which uses paramedic visits for some non-emergency medical care, food as medicine programs for patients with chronic conditions, and pre- and postnatal care.
They're really moving away from our rural community members needing to rely on acute emergency department care into how can we really bring resources out into the community.
Some of Indiana's worst health outcomes are in rural areas. Take the program's Region 4, which includes Madison, Henry, and Wayne counties. That region has higher death rates from diabetes and hypertension than the statewide average. The same is true of heart disease and stroke.
We have to get in front of the problem. Right now we pay a lot of money in that acute and sick care. And so this is part of that affordability, right? How do we make healthcare more affordable? And part of that is we know we get a bigger return on investment when we get in front of it, that true prevention.
Weaver says state officials will announce the winners on September 1st. She says they'll consider whether programs invest in evidence-based areas, how much coordination there is among stakeholders, and how financially sustainable those programs are long-term. Coming up, who will replace Rod Bray as Senate leader? I'll discuss the implications with Indiana's best political team.
The opinions expressed by guests on this broadcast are solely of those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Circle City Broadcasting.
Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in 2 members of Indiana's best political team, Democrat Brad Boswell and Republican Lacey Berkshire. Welcome back to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
So Senate President pro tempore Rod Bray will step down from his leadership post. Lacey, is this a surprise at all?
I don't think so. Not if you've been reading the tea leaves since May. I think part of being a good leader is knowing when it's time to call it, and I think he knew that he didn't have the votes in that room. I think he still got the respect of a lot of people in that room if he doesn't have their votes, certainly, and probably even more so for having, voluntarily stepped down. But I think, anybody who's been watching has seen this coming. It was either going to be voluntarily or by a vote in November. So,
Brad, how might this change the dynamics in the Senate day to day?
Well, the biggest component of who ends up being the pro tem is who gets to appoint the committee chairs. And so I think that'll have a large say on, there's gonna be a lot of horse trading on who ends up in that position. And then we'll see the domino effect on who ends up running the committees. And that'll impact the day-to-day quite a bit.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more because those committee chairs have a lot of power. They can decide whether a bill comes forward at all, what ends up happening to it in committee. Let's talk about that a little more.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So as the process plays out, those committee chairs exert a lot of power over the process, what bills get heard, what don't. the way the budget plays out. We're going into a budget session. And so those individuals that are committee chairs end up largely having the most sort of like day-to-day leadership over the process. And when we see what bills get across the finish line at the end of session, what policies become law in Indiana, it's largely the committee chairs that dictate a lot of that. And so this is what we're talking about here.
Lacey, I'd like your input on that as well. Then also, realistically, how much of a shakeup do you think we might see with the committee chairs?
I think we're going to see a lot. We already had 4 open after the primary, right, with those 4 committee chairs losing re-election. So we were already going to see some major shakeup there. And this is a real thing that happens in these conversations, right? It's, hey, I'll support you for pro tem, but I want to be, environmental affairs chairman. And that's a real thing that happens. And Brad's right. The committee chairs are really the policy drivers in the State House. I know that, pro tem majority floor leader, those are some sexy titles, but the people who are really making the policies and driving that agenda is really the committee chairs.
Tax and fiscal policy's open because Senator Holman lost.
That's right. Environmental affairs is open. Family and children is open. There's a few more that are open after that big shakeup.
Yeah, so this is for both of you. Right now, who do you think is the most likely successor to Senator Rod Bray as president pro tempore?
Well, I don't know the answer to that because the people in the room don't know the answer to that. So
True.
I think I've heard a few names floated around. I know Senator Garton's likely going to make a play for it. He was Senator Bray's number 2. I've heard Senator Scott Baldwin out of Noblesville in the mix as well. Senator Johnson out of the Fort Wayne area as well. I've heard a lot of names. I haven't heard that anybody's got a majority of the votes there, certainly a plurality. All those guys that are mentioned are known entities in the State House. They've all led that caucus through some sticky policy issues. I think they'd all do a great job.
Brad, how do you read this?
Very similarly, I don't think that there's anyone right now that's the obvious front runner. So I think there's going to be a lot of behind the scenes conversations on who can bring a majority vote together. There's going to be horse trading to try to get that done. And ultimately, I think someone's going to have to bow to somebody else in order to sort of say, okay, it's yours, but what do I get for that? And time will tell.
Let's turn to those health care grants I just mentioned. Congress set aside the money as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and we're going to see the state start approving some of those within the next few weeks. Let's go to Brad here on this one. Brad, will some of the programs that I mentioned in our last segment do the job?
Well, I commend Dr. Weaver for taking this seriously, and that's a big job to sift through all those applications and decide what she thinks is going to do the job best. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I trust Dr. Weaver to make the right judgment. I think what's going to be difficult is now this money is going to flow down, and the locals that receive this money are in the position of having to implement it the most efficiently and effectively. And that's tough. And I think there's a situation where I commend all the good work. I hope this really helps people day to day, but in some respects, it's a policy band-aid for these larger issues we have for why do people in rural situations suffer these negative healthcare consequences. And do I hope it has an impact? Yes. Do I think it will? Yes. But I hope we can also at the State House figure out a way to help in a more long-term serious way too.
Lacey, do some of the recent cuts and eligibility changes to Medicaid cancel out whatever benefit we might get from these rural health care grants?
No way. I think they're apples and oranges, right? I think our Medicaid budget was growing at an unsustainable rate. That needed to happen. You can't put everybody on Medicaid and still fund it and the way that it needs to be, right? I think with the rural health transformation grants, I think what's going to be the most interesting way to use these long-term, to make these long-term changes that Brad's mentioning, right, is it's almost like a 5-year pilot program, right? And there's some really innovative ideas that we've seen, submitted in this grant process, from transportation solutions to mobile integrated healthcare to telehealth solutions. So I think what's going to be really fun to see is how the data shakes out on those, right? And so what really does move the needle? What incentivizes these folks to, be more preventative about their care and be more proactive, right? So I think it's going to be really interesting to see the data that comes out of that. And then, at the end of 5 years, what might we want to invest our money in? What really worked? And what do we want to spend our own money in long-term moving forward?
I got about a minute and a half left. Indiana's gas tax holiday will end at the end of the week. That's because the governor's authority runs out. Legislature has not indicated it plans to come in and do a special session. This is for both of you. Lacey, we'll start with you. What sort of lessons for long-term road funding do you think we can draw from this gas tax situation?
Look, I think Governor Braun's done a great job of protecting us as much as he can with a situation that's out of his control, right? I think, I don't know that the legislature is going to call them, come into special session, even if he calls them. I think politically it gets a little sticky if he calls them into special session. It's election year, right? How do they say no to that? But, I think the budget folks who are looking at our books here and thinking about road funding, right, long term, it's very expensive to fix crumbling roads. It's less expensive to maintain good roads, right? So I think in terms of sustainability, I don't know how you keep this going.
Right. Brad, I got about 25 or 30 seconds left.
They need to get back to addressing local government tax structure and tax revenue. We've messed that up 2 sessions in a row. Gas taxes, wheel taxes, whatever the case is, if we're funding local governments, we can fix the roads appropriately. That's where the focus needs to be.
Brad and Lacey, thank you both for coming in today.
Thanks for having us.
And we will be right back.
The opinions expressed by guests on this broadcast are solely of those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Circle City Broadcasting.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday. Also, be sure to check out our new All Indiana Politics Conversations podcast series. It's part of the All Indiana Politics podcast. Have a great rest of your weekend.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.